My name is Renata Giles. I'm 36 years old. And on the morning that four FBI agents walked through the front doors of Giles Industrial Supplies stores on Westinghouse Boulevard in Charlotte, North Carolina, I was 40 minutes away in a coffee shop in South End, watching rain run down a plate glass window and trying to decide if I wanted a second cup. I didn't know it was happening, not yet. I found out the way I found out most things in those years, not from my family, but from someone outside it. My former assistant, Priya Chandrasekaran, sent me a text at 9:17 in the morning. Just 3 words, "They're here, FBI." I stared at those words for a long time. The coffee went cold. The barista called out a name, Jessica, and someone in a yellow jacket jumped up to claim her drink, and the whole small moment felt unbearably ordinary against what I was holding in my hands. I had waited 3 years for something to break. I had filed documents, paid attorneys' fees, driven 45 minutes each way to a job in Gastonia so I could keep my mortgage and my dignity at the same time. I had sat in a therapist's office on South Boulevard every Thursday afternoon and talked about my father and his company and the 31 years of work it represented. His work, and then mine, until the words stopped feeling like wounds and started feeling like a story I was still in the middle of. And now, at a corner table in a South End coffee shop, the middle of that story had just snapped into focus. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment because I think we expect the feeling to be triumph. Clean, bright, vindicated triumph. What I actually felt was grief. Dry and final grief. The kind that comes at the end of something rather than the beginning, when you realize that whatever you were hoping could still be salvaged has finally and fully gone. That is where this story begins. Let me tell you where it begins. Before we get into this, if something in that opening already made your chest tighten, please like and subscribe, but only if this story is genuinely seeking to you. And here's what I have to know right now, before anything else. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I want to see where in this country, where in this world, you're sitting while you listen to this. Because the people who find stories like mine, I don't think they find them by accident. Okay, let's go back. My father, Warren Giles, was born in Conomatalisk, North Carolina, the son of a man who spent 30 years on the floor of a textile mill and a woman who cleaned other people's houses. He told us that story often. Not to shame us, not to perform humility. He wasn't a performative man, but because it was the engine of everything he built. He had watched his father come home with his hands shaking from the vibration of the machines, and he had made it himself a promise that the work he did would be his own. He started Giles Industrial Supply in 1991. I was 3 years old. My brother Derek was 8. In those first years, the company was just Dad, a used box truck he'd bought at auction in Concord, and a phone that rang maybe 3 times on a good day. He sold safety equipment and industrial parts to contractors and small factories across the Piedmont, driving himself everywhere, eating lunch in the cab of that truck, coming home in the evening smelling like engine oil and determination. My mother, Sandra, was working part-time at the front desk of a dental practice in Mint Hill to keep the household running while he built. I watched all of it. I was the kid who sat at the kitchen table when Dad spread out his invoices, who asked questions he didn't always have time to answer, who understood, somehow, from a very young age, that the company was not separate from our family. It was the family. It was what we were made of. By the time I was 10, Dad had a warehouse in Mooresville and 4 employees. By 15, he had 12 and a contract with Braswell Construction out of Huntersville that would grow into one of his anchor relationships over the next 2 decades. By the time I graduated from Myers Park High School, Giles Industrial Supply had 28 employees and annual revenues of $3.2 million. Derek, 5 years older than me, was not watching any of this the way I was. Derek was doing what Derek had always done best, which was being electric in a room. He had a kind of magnetism that made people feel chosen when he talked to them. He went to Wake Forest on a partial scholarship, transferred to UNC Charlotte after 2 years when the money ran thin, graduated with a business degree, and walked into my father's office at 24 and said he wanted to come work for the company. My father gave him the title of Vice President of Sales, a salary of $82,000 a year, and the genuine, uncomplicated joy of a father whose son had come home. I need to say something carefully here, because I know how I sound. I know the word jealousy is already forming in some people's minds. But stay with me, because what I watched happen over the next several years was not a sibling rivalry. It was something more specific and more damaging than that. Derek had charm, and charm got clients to dinner and made them feel good. But the actual work, the follow-through, the problem-solving when a shipment was wrong, the contract language, the relationship management when something fell apart, that work was done by our operations manager, a man named Gerald Hooks, who had been with my father since year 3, and who quietly, professionally, and without complaint covered Derek's gaps for nearly a decade before he finally retired. Gerald's retirement was marked with a handshake and a card from the staff. He deserved considerably more. Meanwhile, I graduated from UNC Charlotte in 2009 with a degree in supply chain management and a 3.87 GPA. I had worked 2 part-time jobs throughout college. One at a logistics firm in Ballantyne and one at a sporting goods store in Pineville. Because I did not want to ask my parents for money they were still figuring out how to spare. When I graduated, I did not walk into my father's office and ask for a title. I asked if I could start in the warehouse. Dad looked at me for a long moment from across his desk. Then he said, "You sure? I need to understand the whole thing," I told him, not just the parts that happen at a desk. Something moved across his face that I didn't know how to name at the time. Now I think it was pride. Quiet. A little caught off guard, the pride of a man who built something from the ground up and was watching his kid understand why that mattered. I spent 18 months in that warehouse. I learned the inventory system, the vendor relationships, the freight contracts. I took a night class at Central Piedmont Community College to earn my APIC certification. I got to know every warehouse employee by name, their schedules, their kids, the loading dock door that stuck every summer when the humidity climbed. I fixed the loading dock door. By 2011, I was operations manager. By 2013, director of operations. By 2015, I was vice president of operations with a staff of 31 people and a salary of $91,000. The company by then was generating $8.7 million in annual revenue, with contracts spanning 4 major construction firms, 2 Concord manufacturing plants, and a regional hospital network that needed specialty maintenance equipment. The growth was real, documented, and traceable, and a significant share of what made it real had my fingerprints on it. I need you to hear something before I go further. I want you to be honest with me in the comments. Have you ever worked harder than anyone else in a place, delivered more than anyone around you, and still felt completely invisible to the one person whose recognition you were quietly building everything toward? Because that was my life inside that company for 12 years. Not invisible to the clients, not invisible to my staff, invisible to my father. Not because he was cruel. Warren Giles was not a cruel man, but Derek was his firstborn, his buddy, his son, and I was the daughter who showed up every day and expected the work to speak for itself. It didn't. Not to Dad. Not until it was almost too late. In February of 2019, my father had a minor stroke. He was 62 years old, sitting in his office on a Tuesday afternoon reviewing a vendor renewal contract, when his right arm went numb and the words he was trying to say stopped making the right shapes. His assistant Carla called 911. He was at Atrium Health Carolina's medical center within 20 minutes. I was there within 40. Derek arrived 3 hours later. The stroke was mild by clinical measure. There was temporary weakness in Dad's right hand, some difficulty with word retrieval for about 6 weeks, and a firm directive from his neurologist to reduce stress, modify his diet, and step back from the day-to-day pressure of running a company. He was discharged after 4 days and came home to the house in Mint Hill, where he'd lived for 30 years. My mother arranged everything around him, with the quiet efficiency of a woman who has spent a lifetime being the infrastructure that held other people upright. Dad was incapable of actual rest. Within 2 weeks, he was calling clients. Within 3, he was asking me to bring files to the house. And within 4 weeks, he had a conversation with Derek about the company's future. I was not in that conversation. I found out from Derek himself. He called me on a Thursday evening in March, and his voice had a quality I hadn't heard in it before. Tighter than his usual ease. Something calibrated. Hey, so Dad and I have been talking about transition planning. He wants clarity around leadership going forward. That makes sense, I said carefully. He should be thinking about that. Yeah, so he's had some documents prepared, a new operating agreement, transfer of controlling interest, a new structure. I went still. Derek, what are you telling me? A pause long enough to be intentional. Dad's transferring 51% controlling interest to me. You keep your shares, 30%, but the decision-making authority changes. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my Noda apartment. The overhead light buzzed faintly the way it always did. My upstairs neighbor's dog clicked across the floor. Nothing in the room looked any different than it had 60 seconds ago. He told you this directly? I said. He signed the documents this week. Who drew them up, Raymond? Raymond Chu had been my father's business attorney since 2003. He was thorough, cautious, and would never have drafted a controlling interest transfer without recommending independent review. A different firm, Derek said. Succession planning specialists. I said I had to go. I hung up, then I sat at that kitchen table until the room got dark around me, and then I went to see my father. He was at the kitchen table in Mint Hill, eating oatmeal. Mom moved around the edges of the room, present but barely visible, pouring coffee for me without being asked, and then finding reasons to be elsewhere. Dad looked better than he had in the hospital. Color had come back. His right hand was still slightly guarded, but he was using it. He smiled when he saw me, his real smile, not the managed one he kept for board meetings. Derek told me, I said. He looked at me steadily. In his eyes, I saw something that wanted to be resolved but was fighting against pain to get there. I know I was going to call you. Were you, Renata? Dad. I have been in that building since I was 22 years old. I built the vendor contract system from the ground up. I negotiated the Braswell renewal in 2017 by myself in that conference room for 4 hours straight. Derek sent me a text from the Panera parking lot. My father set down his spoon. He looked at the table, then at me. I know what you've done for the company. Then what is this? The house held its sounds around us, the refrigerator hum, the creak of a floorboard settling. Out inexplicably, someone was mowing a lawn in February. Derek is the elder, Dad said finally. He's been there from the beginning. He's good with people. He's good with people, I repeated. Not loudly. I didn't raise my voice. Dad, he has not personally negotiated a contract in 3 years. Gerald covered his work for a decade and then retired quietly, and we both know why. The decision is made. His voice was gentle and firm and final. You keep your 30%, you keep your role. But Derek will hold controlling authority. I walked out of that house, carrying something that felt like a stone behind my sternum. Solid and settled and heavy in a way that told me it had been there longer than I'd admitted. I want to stop and ask you this directly. If your parent, 4 weeks out of a hospital after a medical crisis, confused, vulnerable, being managed by a sibling you now had questions about, signed away your future in the building you had spent 12 years constructing from the inside out, what would you have done? Would you have stayed? Would you have walked? Leave it in the comments because I've asked myself that question more times than I can count. I stayed. For 6 months, I stayed. Because the 63 people who worked there were real to me. Because I had 30% ownership and I told myself that was something. Because I thought, with a logic that felt sane at the time, that the day-to-day work was still mine and that would be enough. It was not enough. Within 30 days of the new operating agreement, Derek eyes heard his college roommate, a man named Marcus Webb, as chief financial officer. Marcus had spent 4 years at a regional accounting firm before his departure under circumstances Derek described as a career pivot and which no one at the company questioned out loud. His salary was $115,000. There was a leased silver BMW in the company parking lot by his third week. Within 60 days, Derek renegotiated our supply contract with Forsyth Industrial Parts through a procurement agent Derek had sourced personally, without consulting me. The new terms were objectively worse. Our per-unit cost went up 8%, and our payment schedule compressed from net 60 to net 30. When I raised this in a department meeting, Derek looked across the conference table at me and said, with the practiced ease of someone who has rehearsed the line, "The new structure has strategic advantages you may not be seeing from your vantage point, Renata." My vantage point. I had managed procurement for 5 years. The third thing happened in October 2019. Derek called a board meeting. The voting members were Derek, my father, who attended by phone and was, my mother told me later, dealing with a chest cold that had lingered for 2 weeks, and Marcus Webb, whom Derek had installed on the board at a meeting I had also not been informed of. At that meeting, the board voted to approve a new equity issuance that diluted my ownership stake from 30% to 12%. They also voted to change my title from Vice President of Operations to Senior Operations Consultant. I was not invited to the meeting. I found out from the minutes which Marcus emailed to me at 7:43 the following morning, with a subject line that read, FYI, Board Actions 1014. I read those minutes standing in the parking lot outside the Giles Industrial Supply Building, in cold October air, my breath making small clouds, my phone warm in my hand. Then I got in my car and drove directly to Raymond Chu's office on East Independence Boulevard and sat in his waiting room without an appointment for 45 minutes until he could fit me in. Raymond listened to everything without interrupting. He reviewed the documents I'd forwarded from my phone. He had the careful expression of a man who is professionally obligated not to say what he is actually thinking. Renata, he said when I finished, I did not draft these documents. The new operating agreement, the one signed in March, was prepared by a firm called Caldwell and Moss. I know them. They handle private business acquisitions and transactions, not succession planning. He paused. Your father at the time of signing was 4 weeks post-stroke. Questions of capacity and undue influence are worth a conversation with a litigation attorney. I drove home and then I called one, Patricia Hahn of Hahn and Rivera on South Tryon, who specialized in business disputes and charged $380 an hour and did not traffic in softened language. We can challenge the March agreement on capacity grounds, Patricia told me. It's difficult. Your father was not legally declared incapacitated and he signed voluntarily. But we can build a record. She paused. Before we do anything, I want to ask you, have you seen anything in the financial records that raised concerns? Anything that felt off? I thought about Marcus Webb's BMW, the Forsyth contract. A comment Carla had made in passing about an invoice dispute with Braswell Construction she'd been told to redirect to Marcus. Possibly, I said. I still have legal access to the records. Pull copies of everything you have legitimate access to, Patricia said, quietly, and now, before that access changes. I spent the next 72 hours making copies, financial reports, vendor contracts, client correspondence, invoice records going back 3 years. Everything within the scope of my role. I burned it to a hard drive and took it home. 2 weeks later, Derek sent me a certified letter informing me that my employment at Giles Industrial Supply was terminated effective November 15, 2019. Role elimination due to restructuring. My 12% stake was unaffected. My building access was not. I stood in my apartment foyer and read that letter. Then I set it down on the console table very carefully, as if it were something that could still hurt me if I mishandled it. Then I sat on my bathroom floor and cried for approximately 40 minutes. Not dramatically, just thoroughly. The way you cry when the thing you were hoping wouldn't happen has finally, officially happened. Then I got up, I washed my face, I made dinner, and I started figuring out what came next. I want to tell you about the next 18 months, honestly, because I think the way people talk about rebuilding tends to skip the ugly part. The part that isn't a montage. The part that is a Tuesday morning in December, eating cereal at a kitchen table, staring at a spreadsheet of your savings, $41,200, and a mortgage payment, and a litigation attorney billing you $380 an hour, and 12% of a company you can no longer access. What I had beyond the numbers. My APEX certification, 7 years of operations leadership, and the knowledge of what I was actually capable of, which I had to hold on to like a rope in a river. I applied for 7 positions in December, 3 callbacks, 2 went nowhere. One became an offer. Director of Operations at Southern Tiers Logistics in Gastonia, $88,000 a year, 45 minutes from Charlotte. I took it. Drove to Gastonia every single day for 8 months. I learned their systems, I rebuilt their vendor relationships, reorganized their warehouse layout, and cut their fulfillment error rate from 11% to 3% in 2 quarters. My manager, Dave Okonkwo, told me at my 6-month review that I was the best hire he'd made in 5 years. I thanked him, drove home, deposited my paycheck, paid Patricia's invoice, and went to therapy on Thursday with Dr. Lori Bentz on South Boulevard, who had of asking questions that felt conversational until they suddenly weren't. What would it mean? She asked me one Thursday in January 2020. If your father genuinely didn't see what you built, not because he was manipulated, not because Derek forced him, just because he looked and didn't see it. I didn't answer that one for about 3 sessions. In March 2020, Patricia called. I want to ask you something. When you've been carrying a painful situation for months, managing it, staying functional, filing the paperwork and paying the invoices and driving to work and coming home, and someone calls with news that might finally change the shape of things, what is the very first thing you feel? Is it relief, fear, or something that doesn't have a clean name yet? Tell me in the comments, because I remember exactly what I felt when Patrician's name came up on my phone, and it wasn't what I expected. Renata, Patricia said, I need you to look at something. What she had found was this: 3 vendors in the records I'd copied, appearing under the name CMW Industrial Solutions, had issued invoices to Giles Industrials as Supply totaling $347,000 between January and August of 2019. All authorized by Marcus Webb. CMW Industrial Solutions appeared in no state business registry Patricia could locate, no website. A P.O. box in Raleigh, nothing more. There was more. The Braswell Construction account, our largest client, had payment records showing Braswell had been invoiced for equipment orders that matched nothing in our delivery logs. Patricia estimated the discrepancy between $200,000 and $500,000, pending access to fuller records. Are you telling me Derek and Marcus were stealing from the company? I asked. I'm telling you what your documents suggest, Patricia said. I'm not an investigator. But, Renata, if this is what I think it is, we're looking at wire fraud. Possibly conspiracy. That's federal territory. You should consider a report to the FBI. I did not call the FBI that day. I sat with it for 2 weeks, and I want to tell you exactly why. Because the name attached to the fraud was my brother's. Derek, who took me to a Hornets game when I was 12 because he had client tickets and thought I'd enjoy it. Derek, who called me late one night when he was 28 and a relationship had ended and cried on the phone in a way he never let anyone else see. The person I had a childhood with, whatever that childhood looked like. And I thought about my father, about what it would do to Warren Giles to watch his company and his son go down at this time. About 63 people with mortgages and kids and routines built around a building on Westinghouse Boulevard. I called my mother. That conversation was not what I expected. I told her carefully what Patricia had found. I told her I was considering going to the FBI. There was a long silence. Then Sandra Giles said, Renata, you need to think very carefully about what you are doing to this family. Mom, Derek is stealing from Dad. You don't know that. I have invoices from a company that doesn't exist. You have copies you made without authorization. I had authorization. I was employed there when I made them. Another silence, longer. Derek says you've been difficult since the restructuring, she said finally. That you've been looking for ways to undermine him, I said. Okay, Mom, just that. I said it quietly. And I said it the way you say something when you understand that a door has been closed for much longer than you knew. I filed a report with the FBI's Charlotte field office in April 2020. The investigation took 14 months. During those 14 months, I kept driving to Gastonia. I was promoted to VP of Operations at Southern Tier in January 2021 with a salary of $107,000. I started drafting a business plan for a supply chain consulting firm. I went to therapy. I ran 4 miles every morning along the Greenway, near my apartment, in cold and heat and the Gray's Charlotte November, with the specific determination of someone who has decided that what was done to her will not be the final sentence of her story. On a Tuesday morning in June 2021, Priya sent me 3 words. I was in the South End coffee shop. The rain was running down the window. A woman at the next table was on speakerphone about a house closing. The espresso machine hissed. Jessica's drink was ready. I sat with my phone and I waited. At 11:24 a.m., Patricia called. I executed the search warrant this morning, she said. Derek's office, Marcus Webb's home office, and company servers. The scope includes wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud against a financial institution, and false statements in a business transaction. She paused. Renata, the document examiner they've brought in is looking at the March 2019 operating agreement. Specifically, a section on shareholder authority that may have been inserted after the original signing. I pressed my hand flat against the cold surface of the table. You're saying it was altered, I said. I'm saying there are questions. The investigators will make that determination. I drove to Mint Hill. My father was in the living room, in the brown leather armchair by the window, the one he'd sat in for as long as I could remember. He was looking at nothing. My mother was on the couch across from him. She didn't look at me when I came in. I sat down across from Dad. He was 70 now. He looked, in that moment, older than that. Not in years, but in a way that had to do with the particular weight of having something taken from you that you didn't know you were still holding. Dad, I said. He looked at me. His eyes were red. Not from crying, my father never cried in front of people, but from the sustained effort of not doing it. I should have seen it, he said. I didn't say anything. With Marcus. With the money. His right hand, the one the stroke had taken a little of and never fully returned, moved on the arm of the chair. And I should have seen what you were building in that company. What you were. I should have seen it, and I... He stopped. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head more times than I can count. In therapy, in the car on I-85, in the shower at 5:45 in the morning. I had imagined all the things I might say to my father when this day came. Some of them I am not proud of. Some of them were entirely fair. What I actually said was, I know. Not as forgiveness, not as accusation, just as acknowledgement of a true thing. I know you should have. I know you didn't. I know who I am regardless of both. Derek was indicted in September 2021. Marcus Webb was indicted alongside him. The charges: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud against a financial institution, and making false statements in a business transaction. The last charge connected to the March 2019 operating agreement, which the document examiner determined had a section on shareholder authority, physically inserted after Warren Giles had signed his name. When my father learned what had been done to the document he'd signed in that hospital-adjacent haze, 4 weeks after his stroke, he sat with his attorney for 3 days. Then he asked to sit with me. I want to fix what can be fixed, he said. We negotiated the restoration of my original 30% ownership, formally documented. An acknowledgement that my removal from the VP of Operations role had been wrongful. A cash settlement of $125,000 from the company, representing a portion of 2 years of lost salary, which was not everything I had lost, would never touch the years or the cost or the mornings on bathroom floors. but was real and recorded, and was my father doing the one remaining thing available to him. I did not return to Giles Industrial Supply. I had those conversations with Patricia and then with myself, and my answer was always the same. The company was in the hands of a crisis management team while the investigation ran its course, and the ownership structure was sorted out. My father, who should have retired 5 years before any of this happened, was technically still on the board, and I had something I was already building. In January 2022, I opened Giles Operations Group. No relation to the other Giles, except that it was entirely mine, a boutique supply chain consulting firm based in Charlotte. I brought 3 people with me. Priya, who left the company the week after the FBI search, and whose loyalty I will not forget for the rest of my life. A logistics analyst named Theo Kim, who had been one of the sharpest minds on the floor for 3 years. And a contract specialist named Dana Whitfield, who had been quietly doing extraordinary work at Giles Industrial Supply for years, and who deserved a room where that got noticed. We worked out of a rented office in Uptown for the first 6 months, 4 clients. By the end of the year, 11. By the close of 2023, we had revenues of $1.1 million. I will not pretend there was no satisfaction in that number. There was, but it was a quiet satisfaction, the kind that belongs to the work itself, not to the fact of having outlasted anyone. Derek took a plea deal in February 2023. 7 months in federal custody, with credit for pretrial monitoring, and $612,000 in ordered restitution. He served his sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Butner, North Carolina. My mother called me the week he was sentenced. First time we'd spoken in 8 months. "I want you to know that I said things that weren't fair to you," she said. "You did," I said. "I want to, Mom." I stopped her gently, the way you stop someone when you need them to hear what you actually mean. "I love you. The door between us isn't closed. But the relationship we had before this wasn't healthy for me, and I need you to sit with that honestly before we go any further." She was quiet for a long time. "Okay," she said finally. "That is where we are. A door that is neither fully open nor firmly closed. 2 women on their respective sides of it, figuring out what they're willing to offer. Today, I am 36 years old. Giles Operations Group has 16 active clients across the Southeast, 9 employees, and a lease on new office space on South Tryon Street we move into in March. Theo was promoted to Operations Director in October. Priya is negotiating her own equity stake. Dana just closed a consulting engagement with a distribution company in Raleigh worth $380,000 annually. I run 4 miles every morning on the Greenway. I see Dr. Bentz twice a month. Once a month, on the first Friday evening, I have dinner with 4 women I met through a professional network. All of us former corporate operations leaders who decided to build our own things. At a Thai restaurant in Dilworth, where we talk about money and strategy and growth, and every opportunity we were told we weren't ready for. We are all very ready. I have Sunday phone calls with my father. They are not easy, but they are honest. More honest, maybe, than anything we said to each other in the 30 years before this. He asks about the firm, and I tell him the truth. He talks about the company, which is still sorting out its future, and I listen. He doesn't ask me to come back, I think he knows. One afternoon last October, he said, "I want you to know that what you built at the company, and now I see it, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of you." I was sitting on my couch, a cup of tea getting warm in my hands, the October light coming through the windows at the particular slant that only happens that time of year in the Carolinas, where it turns everything amber and unhurried. I thought about every version of that sentence I had wanted him to say, every room I had imagined hearing it in, every year I had worked, expecting the work to eventually say it for me. "Thank you, Dad," I said. That was all. Not erasure, not a return of what was lost, not the childhood revised or the years restored. Just acknowledgement, just real. The thing I want to leave you with is this. I did not get my ending by destroying my brother. I got it by becoming someone who genuinely no longer needed to. What stays with me isn't the FBI search warrant, or the indictment, or the plea deal. What stays with me is the warehouse where it started when I was 22, with Gerald Hooks shaking my hand and saying, "You'll do." It's the Braswell contract I renegotiated alone. The hard drive I copied at midnight in October 2019 before they took my access. Patricia Hahn and her 380 an hour clarity. Priya's three-word text on a rainy Tuesday morning in a South End coffee shop. All of it is still in me. The loss and the work and the proof of what I was capable of when no one was watching and no one was giving me credit, and I did it anyway. If this story is living in your chest the way it lives in mine, if you have ever been the one who built something and watched someone else claim it, I want to hear from you. Tell me what you would have done differently. Tell me what you held on to when everything else was taken. Tell me what your version of the hard drive looks like. Leave it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, everything you need is in the description.